Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to round 2 coverage of my games from the 2018 Oregon Open. I had the white pieces here and started off with e4. My opponent, by the way, was an older gentleman whose rating was 1604. My rating was 1834. Although, as I said at the time, I didn't know the ratings because they were not posted, so I kind of assumed he was higher rated. First of all, because he was older, and also because I won the previous game, and usually you get paired up against a higher rated player after you win in the first round. Anyway, let's see. I go e4. He went c6. He selected the Caro-Kann defense. I went d4. I went d5. And I go e5, the advanced variation. So he chooses bishop f5. That's the main move. I go knight f3. I'm selecting the short variation popularized by Nigel Short. You just simply develop your pieces and castle quickly, and then play with moves like c4 here to try and undermine the queen side later. But well, black has ideas too, and we'll see some of them coming up shortly. So he plays e6, just opening up a line for his bishop and protecting this guy. This is a long game, so I'm going to go over parts of it kind of quickly, but we can go through the opening here. And c5 here, that's the main move, or one of the main moves. And I go bishop e3. I'd seen this position before, and I looked up the correct response because I have played this wrong. I think my natural move, my natural tendency is to play a move like c3 here, but bishop e3 is the main move, and actually allows black to weaken your center. And now white is now down to just a single pawn in the center, which will have to be supported. But he's got active pieces, and that's part of the idea of this variation. Now black here played an unusual move. Up to this point it's pretty standard, but bishop g6 is not the main move here. Just to give an idea of how it normally continues, the main move here is knight e7. Not worrying about the exchange of the bishop, but just developing. And white's in no hurry to take the bishop either. I guess it's not clear if the trade of this knight for this bishop is a good trade or not. It wins the bishop pair, but that's a pretty nice knight, and it's not clear if this bishop is so great out here. It is the bad bishop in a sense, because it's blocked out by these pawns over here. It's limited to one side of the board, and maybe it can get harassed by pawns and stuff. So you leave the bishop there for later play. Let's see. So knight d2. Black develops a knight c6, and this knight goes to f3, defending the pawn, defending the knight. And things are held together for the moment, although I still feel a little bit uneasy about this position based on my experiences of having the center dissolve when playing against the Caro-Kann. It seems like you may have some trouble holding on to that e-pawn at some point. But anyway, that's what black has going for him, play against the center. Let's get back to the game. My opponent played bishop g6, not the most common move, but not especially bad either. I castled here. He went knight e7, and I went with f4. So that was my idea, based on my previous experience, was keep the knights out of the way and get these pawns developed, and use the f-pawn to support the center. You often play this way against the French defense, for example. But in this particular position, a more interesting move here, pointed out by the chess engine, probably better, is c4. So just immediately counterattacking the center. I think it's pretty typical in this variation to get in the c4 move. And there's a wrinkle here I wanted to point out, which is after black takes, you don't have to take back with the bishop right away, but you can play knight a3. And this allows you to get a knight onto a good square here when you take back on c4. So that's a nice way to play for white. And one of the points is that the bishop would normally snap off that knight, but it's blocked by the knight on e7. So it's like this one particular moment in time where you can play this sequence. So it looks like a nice move right there. Anyway, I played f4. This is all okay. Nothing really goes wrong in the opening. We both play pretty reasonably. Let's see, he goes knight b6. I go knight c3. This is not particularly accurate. The knight really belongs on d2, I think. Having looked at what happened in this game and looked at other games, it's knight d2 seems to be the main move here. From d2, the knight can go to f3, as we saw, or maybe even to b3. It also keeps an eye out on these squares where maybe black will try to park a piece at some point. So it just seems a little more flexible. Also, black immediately plays a6 here. That takes away the b5 square for this knight. And now I have to start wondering where is that knight going? It doesn't seem to have too many good squares to go to, and even these retreating squares are blocked at the moment. Anyway, I played queen d2, just lifting my queen up off the back rank, connecting my rooks. And he took the knight. I took back, and then he played knight to c6. So here I don't want to trade off this bishop. It might be useful defending the center, so I just drop it back. Notice that I can't go to the e3 square because he has the fork, so that's something to watch out for in this position. In fact, the chess engine likes d4 right now as a best move for black, chasing my knight back. But what black played was reasonable too. It's bishop b4. It's developing a piece, it's pinning my knight, and it comes with the threat of d4, winning that pinned knight. So I have to kick the bishop, I have to do something immediately. He chooses to retreat. I kick it again to break the pin, and he goes to b6. So he's prepared to trade off that bishop, I guess. And maybe it makes more sense out here than back on f or c7 where it looks at the e pawn. There's some point, I guess, to putting on an f7 and putting some extra pressure on the center. Maybe another way to play. But nothing wrong with this. So I go knight a4, not to force the exchange, but more to get my knight to this good square on c5. He took, I took back, and then he castled. And here I went ahead and played knight c5 immediately. The chess engine likes in this position the move g4, which actually I play that later in the game. I just didn't think of it at this point. But it's the kind of move that makes sense. You are still looking to play against this bishop over here and prove that it's not well placed there. But it was hard to resist a move like knight c5, putting the knight on a good square where it can't be chased, at least not immediately, because the knight can always take on a6 with the bishop also defending or attacking that square. So the knight's stable here and looks like a good square for it. Let's see, he went queen e7. That defends the b pawn and gets the queen out of the way. He wants to connect his rooks. Let's see, I played c3. Maybe it looks like a funny move here, but well, I checked it out with the chess engine. It seems to be one of the top choices here. My idea is to put my queen here where I'm defending the knight and then push these pawns forward. And so to make that work, I have to stop him from playing d4. So that's what I was thinking here. And it's a bit of a long-winded plan. I mean, it might be a good idea in general, but black immediately plays an active move over here on the queen side, and that kind of stops me from doing this. I can't push the pawn immediately. I still need to play my queen over here, and then he could take, which is what he does anyway. So I just decided to put my bishop on a better square. He did give up this square, so I'll take advantage of it. And now he takes. And at this moment, also if I'd moved the queen, it would have still been an issue. At this moment, the a pawn is pinned, so I have to take back with the c pawn. So now I no longer have this idea of queen e3 because of that d4 pawn push. But, well, his queen side is a little bit weakened. I've got 2 pawns against 1 over here, so maybe I can look forward to playing an endgame with an extra queenside pawn. And in the meantime, he has an extra center pawn. So, you know, advantages to both sides. He went with knight a7 here, chasing my bishop. I dropped it back. And he went rook to d8, so putting his rook behind the d pawn, maybe thinking about pushing that pawn forward. And I got my queen out of the way with queen b2. I was thinking of a couple things here. One is defending the rook, so there's no longer a pin on this file. The other idea is defending the pawn so the rook is free to move. And the third idea is defending the e-pawn so that maybe at some point I can push the f-pawn forward even if the e-pawn comes under fire. It's actually not under fire at the moment, but this knight will often come back to c6 and attack that pawn. So it's good to have it defended. So I thought that was a reasonable move. He played knight c8 here. Pretty interesting, but it made me think. You know, I was looking at this position and I see that black's rooks are disconnected. His knight is on the back rank. And I'm thinking, well, maybe this time I should start playing actively against his king side. And here's where I played that g4 move that the computer had been suggesting earlier. And he responded, it looks like there's a threat to capture the bishop. He responded with this move. It's not entirely clear that I can actually catch that bishop, because he does have, after the exchange, he can bring the queen out with check. The chess engine, yeah, doesn't bother moving the bishop. It plays like this. It kicks the knight with b6 first. And then, let's see, I play knight b3, and then brings the queen out to h4. And that seems to be sufficient. If I were to try something like this backfires now, because after this exchange, well, I just wanted to show this queen g5 idea, which I mentioned earlier. So it's, there's a check there. If he blocks with the rook, I can take the pawn with the queen. If I move the king, then black can take the pawn with the bishop. So either way, black ends up a pawn up, and my king is kind of exposed. So that just doesn't work for me at all. Okay, so in this position, he didn't play queen h6. He played bishop e4. He just got the bishop out of the way. And now the first real mistake of the game happens, and I make it. It's interesting, I'm playing a lower-rated player, although I didn't know he was lower-rated, but still. It's interesting that the first serious mistake was made by me. He seems to be playing very solidly. Maybe at some point we'll find a few spots where we can see some of his weaknesses, but up to now he seems like a very strong player. So my mistake was to take this bishop. Now, taking the bishop, it's maybe a questionable trade if you just look at the pieces. This was a pretty good knight posted out here. He could kick it with b6 at some point, but he could also find a home on d4, and it can't really be chased away from there. So it's a pretty good piece. I'm giving it up for his bishop, which is operating on this diagonal, but it's maybe limited in its scope by the pawns in the center. So it's a questionable trade from that point of view. But I thought I would round up this weak pawn here when he recaptured. But it did not work out that way. Let's back up and see what I could have played instead of knight e4. One move I could have tried is queen d4. It's interesting. The chess engine is not at all worried about me taking that bishop and winning a pawn here. It just plays queen to c7. And says also that I shouldn't take that bishop, but I should push on with f5 and continue the attack like this. And it thinks there's a slight edge to white here. So that's what I should have played. Just to show what happens on the exchange. If I take the bishop and grab the pawn, well, he develops his knight. And now I need to play a quiet move here, actually. Let's see. Maybe something like rook back to f1, just defending the back rank and stuff. And black can activate his pieces. He's got ideas of the knight coming in. Maybe knight c6 and rook to d5. And it seems like even though black is a pawn down, the chess engine gives black an even evaluation. So black has compensation for the pawn. If I get too aggressive here and play something like this is probably how I would have played if I had spotted this idea. I would just put my bishop and queen in a line, threaten to come in to h7. But he has this nice move, queen c3, hitting my loose rook in the corner. Yeah, my pieces are just not quite coordinated. And also it's an attack on the bishop, so kind of a double attack. I can take here. That's a tempo. Now I have to save my rook, so I can bring the rook over and defend the bishop. So it seems like I've saved everything for the moment, but black can grab this pawn with the rook. And actually, yeah, my pieces are just kind of awkwardly placed here. It's difficult for me to defend all of this, and black has the advantage here. So anyway, it's I guess a position from which it's easy for white to get into trouble. I think it has to do with the fact that I pushed these pawns forward and weakened my king side. So I have to play a little bit carefully with respect to that. So anyway, I didn't think of that queen d4 move. I just took the bishop right away. He took back. And now I want to move my bishop so that I can bring a rook over here and attack the pawn. And I was having trouble finding a good square for it. Most squares it goes to, here or here, for example, the knight can chase it away, and wasn't sure it would end up on a good square if I let it get chased around. So, and also I was a little bit worried about this pawn. I wanted to keep it defended against ideas like queen to h4, which is a very real idea in this position. We'll see it played in a little bit. So I dropped my bishop back to d7, or d1 rather. So the combination of knight takes and bishop to d1 is actually losing for white, and black has a winning plan from here. Let's see. The chess engine says I could still fight on with rook or bishop to f1. And this would lead to a position where black has maybe slight edge, has a material edge, but I have compensation. So let's show how this might happen. He pushes the pawn forward. I block with my rook. He brings the queen out, now hitting the g-pawn. I take, he takes. I block with the bishop, and then he takes on f3. And now, well, this bishop is looking pretty good here. And maybe the rook can come over and chase the queen a bit. My queen is still defending the e-pawn. So I have some activity here, but I am down a pawn. And probably a slight edge to black all in all. Anyway, I played bishop to d1, and he has a winning move here in e3, which fortunately for me didn't play. But just to show some lines here, say rook e2 to stop it, queen h4. And now I was just planning to take it. I mean, this was my idea. I take the pawn and defend this pawn with my bishop. But actually, there's a very good response from black. So this is your first tactics quiz in this video. What's the best move for black here? Okay, pause the video if you want some time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. There's a great tactic here. Black can just, boom, take that bishop with check. I have to take back, and then take this pawn with check. Yeah, that pawn's undefended now after the bishop is gone, and it's a fork, and black gets the rook back and is just up a piece, so that's winning for black. So after e3, rook e2, queen h4, I can't play that move, rook takes e3, and so that means I'm in some trouble. I might be able to get away with, and it's hard to find a move here. Anyway, black is just better after e3. And I have to struggle to find moves. But he didn't play e3 right away. He played a move that makes sense, actually. He played knight b6. Let's see. I went bishop d1. He went knight b6. And it's a good move, too. It's just that e3 was a little bit stronger. But this keeps an advantage to black. He's got good squares to go in with his knight, and it makes sense to connect his rooks and get his knight active before proceeding with the attack. Also, the knight on, say, d5 there supports this pawn coming to e3, and it makes me wonder how I'm ever going to round that pawn up. But anyway, I continue. I play rook e2. He goes e3. And now I can't take it because of the fork. Rook takes here. There's a knight fork there. Gotta keep your eyes open here. So I played queen to c3. He went knight to d5, kicking my queen, hitting the pawn, also attacking the f-pawn. So I go queen d4. I had to think for a long time before playing this move because I am putting my queen directly in line with his rook. But it turns out there's no great discovery that the knight has. So this is okay for me. I mean, black is still better, but as far as my choices go, this is one of the okay ones. Let's see. And he played queen h4. And now we reach an interesting point because when I was calculating all this and trying to figure out if I could play this queen d4 move, I had planned at this point to defend the pawn. I'd seen he had queen h4, and I planned to defend the pawn with rook to g2. But at this point, I noticed that there's a problem with rook g2, and I fortunately didn't play it. But this is your second tactics quiz here. What's the problem with playing rook g2? Okay, pause the video if you want time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away again. After rook g2, it's mate in one with queen to e1. And now you can see one of those problems that this bishop on d1 creates. It blocks the defense of the back rank. So I'm in big trouble here. And not so easy for me to defend that pawn. I played f5, which is probably as good a try as any. And he just takes it. And now, now I'm in big trouble. I searched around for a move once again and came up with bishop to b3. It gets the bishop off the back rank, puts a little pressure on the knight, and it's probably one of the best moves in the circumstance. But black should probably go on to win this game with taking. Now this does plunge it into an endgame, but this is probably the best move. He takes here, I take, he takes. Now I can take off this knight. This is one of the ideas I had, and finally round up this dangerous passed pawn. But this is an endgame where black is a pawn up, and he's already got his rooks pretty actively posted. There's pressure on that A pawn, and it's pinned, so indirectly I have to worry about the B pawn as well. He's got pressure on this pawn, which is isolated. So my pawns are just a bit more scattered than black's. And overall, the chess engine gives black a +2 advantage or something like that. So with good play, probably black should go on to win that endgame. Anyway, here's where my opponent came up with a brainstorm. And this is one of his weaknesses. He talked to me after the game, is that sometimes he gets carried away with his attacking ideas and just doesn't play the simple moves. He pushed on with f4. This is a very dangerous looking move, right? He's got a pair of pawns that are passed. They're approaching my king here. The rook is not a good piece to stop them. But it does leave the knight hanging, and I just took the knight. So this, however, does not turn the tide. In fact, it's actually about an even game here. He has a lot of play here with these pawns, but it's just enough to get his material back, basically. So he pushes the f-pawn forward. I get to take the e-pawn, and then he finds this move. This saves black, really. This is a great move. Rook takes d5. So if you want a third tactical challenge, why can't I take his rook? How can black get away with this? Okay, yeah, pause the video and spend some time thinking about it. It's a nice combination here. If I take the rook, yeah, I'm giving the answer away now. If I take the rook, plays the check, and now there's a threat of queen g2 checkmate if I go, for example, to h1, so I have to go to f1. He can come in with the check. I have to go to e1. He can push the pawn with check, and wherever I go, well, actually, if I go here, then he can queen with check. He gets to queen with check wherever I go. If I go here, that's probably the most plausible choice. Then he queens with check this way. I don't know. I mean, he wins a rook. But this is a... no, he doesn't. I win the rook. This is just winning for black. So anyway, let's back up to the game. Yeah, I didn't take the rook. I saw that coming. I played queen to f4, and that's why this position is kind of even. Let's see. He can push this pawn forward, and I just step up with the king. I think I could have taken it, but I just wanted to block it with my rook. He defends it with his rook, preparing to maybe push it with check again. I block. And so, it's been even for a while. But now he makes another mistake. He plays g5. Right here, the chess engine is recommending h5 as a way to continue the game and, around even. So g5. So there's a good move for white here. So if you want to take a moment and see if you can spot an idea for white in this position. Okay, pause the video if you want time to think about it. I'm giving the answer away again. It's queen to e4. It's a kind of double attack. It's attacking this pawn, and it's also threatening rook to h3, attacking his queen, which is trapped over there. So he has to save the queen, and then you can grab the pawn. And now you can look forward to a good endgame. White has a good endgame, being able to round up this pawn and having a pair of passed pawns over here on the queen side. Looks good for white. So that's how I should have played. But, I'd been under attack for so long. And we're on move 36 here, too, so we're getting near the time control. It was 2 hours for the first 40 moves. Anyway, I just blocked here. I was happy to escape this position alive, and this leads to basically an even position again. He takes, I take, and he plays rook a2. I had thought, actually, that I was coming out slightly ahead, but I had neglected to take into account the fact that he can win this a-pawn. I can't defend it. So I grab his f-pawn. He grabs my a-pawn, and I go ahead and trade off one pair of rooks and block. And so it's just an even endgame. Maybe this pawn is a little bit loose here, but there's nothing so serious that should cause me to lose the game. So let's see. Let's go forward. This is a long game, so I want to kind of skip through some parts kind of quickly. I activate my rook, and he activates his rook. And I bring it up to defend this pawn from the side, but I also have the ability to come forward and attack his pawns as well. He chases me around and then checks. I could have come directly to f3. I actually waste a move here, which may be important. I'm not entirely sure. I moved my king back to g3, but the idea with king f3 is that if black takes this pawn, I can go here, and he can't get back in time to defend it. So I will win this b pawn and defend my b pawn. So that'll be good for me. Anyway, I went rook g3. He went king f8. Now I realized I didn't need to go there, and I played rook to f3, letting him take that pawn, but he still shouldn't take it. He comes forward with king e7, so he realized that as well. I come forward with my king, plays h6, maybe a waiting move, maybe just strengthening this pawn. Now I come forward to my king. I was getting maybe a little bit optimistic if I could get over here and attack this pawn. I'm a little bit closer than his king. Perhaps I could accomplish something. But he cuts me off immediately with rook c2, so I can't get over there. I just drop back. I'm kind of offering to repeat, but he keeps playing. He plays rook to f2. And I've been waiting for a moment like this where his rook is off this pawn, so I can get in this rook d5 move. Like I mentioned, when he played rook takes h2, rook d5 was an idea there. And I just quickly played that without thinking, without doing the normal check. So maybe you can spot the move that black has here. Yeah, I hope you got this one. This is pretty easy. Bam. So I had fought my way back to a winning position, and here suddenly I am losing again. Yeah, this is just good for black. Got my king out of the way. He takes, and yeah, he's just got a passed pawn over here, and my pawns are not in a position to do much. So he should probably go on to win this game. Let's see. I continued with king f3. I need to hold on to these pawns before he starts attacking them. He went rook f4 check, went all the way over, went b4, and I'm going to put my rook behind the pawn, but I wanted to try this maneuver first with rook to d6. I actually was thinking, I'd kind of forgotten he had placed his rook here. I guess I was still rattled by my silly blunder a couple of moves back, because I was thinking when I placed my rook here that I was stopping him from moving that pawn forward. I was just planning to take it. Of course, that doesn't work. I place my rook here. He goes here. And so now I have to struggle to find something. I can't take with my pawn. He takes the rook. I can't take with my rook because he will trade out and queen this pawn. I'm outside the square. So I drop my rook back here. I realize that if he takes, I can grab the h-pawn. So he does go ahead and take. I don't grab the h-pawn immediately. I throw in this h4 move. I'm trying to undermine his rook a little bit. If I can get him to take here, and then I can come back with my king, and the pressure on the rook might stop him from moving the e-pawn forward. And my rook here is keeping his king cut off. So I'm trying to hold this position together, but with good play, black should probably still win. Let's see. He went rook c4. I went rook takes h6. I grabbed the pawn now. And he went rook c3. Actually, here is one chance that black had to win. So the winning move here is b3. Push the pawn forward is pretty natural. But you have to kind of see the idea here. Also, you have to be confident that taking this pawn is not a problem. But I guess it's a little too slow to take that pawn. Anyway, let's just follow the computer line here. Rook b6 to stop that pawn from coming forward. Rook c3 with a check to drive my king back, and then taking. So if he checks first and then takes, after dragging my rook away from the h-file, he's now got 3 passed pawns, and this is a winning position for black. So that's the winning sequence here. Instead, he did the check first. He checked my king. I dropped back. Then he took. And I have just enough time to take this pawn. And after b3, I can draw this game. And the drawing idea here is to play rook h7 and get behind the pawn. So I saw that I could do that. I was thinking, though, I could do something else. that should also allow me to get behind the pawn in time. And that's this move, rook h6. And my idea is I want to keep his king cut off so that I get behind the pawn, and he can't bring his king up to support the e-pawn, at least not quickly. So I'm trying to have everything, but it's not as fast. And actually, there is, once again, a winning idea here for black. If you want to see what it is, if you want to study this position for a while, it's kind of an interesting endgame position, pretty simplified. So you can pause the video here and look at this position for a while. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away again. The only move that wins here for black is rook to c1. And the idea is to place the rook in front of the pawn, and then as I come over, go all the way to b2. And I can't come any closer. This is an important point. If I come here, he just goes here with the idea of skewering my king and picking up the rook if I take the pawn. I'm just one step shy, right? If I had been able to get my king to this square, then the check would allow me to come here and defend my rook after taking. So I'm just one step shy of being able to do this. But that's the key. The f3 square is too far away. You've got to start from a square like e3. So I have to go back to g2. I have to stop them from playing tricks like rook h1. And then he can just start pushing the e-pawn. And between these two pawns, he will win the game. So that is the winning idea here. And he didn't play that. This is a close endgame, actually. He played the move b2, pretty natural. And this is only a draw. And so I put my rook behind it. We're just going to go through these moves. Let's see. He checks. I bring my king up. And now he starts going after my rook, and I start pushing my pawn. It's key that I have counterplay with the g-pawn here. Also, my king is controlling these squares, so his rook can't come over and get behind my pawn. So he comes over and attacks my rook and chases it a little bit, but I get here to where I'm going to protect the pawn when it's about to queen. He gives a check, and I step over here, staying behind my pawn. At this point, he realizes he can't make any progress, and he needs to do something quickly before I get to the point where I'm going to queen here. So he plays this move, and this secures the draw. But it was actually drawn all along. With best play, it was always drawn. So I take, he takes, and then I have to get my king in front of this pawn. Well, I am right now threatening to check his king and take the pawn. He can check me, and I put my king in front, and he can drive me back. So I could have come directly to f2 instead of going by way of f4, but we would have ended up in the same position. And now, his king can't really come forward. I've got my king in front of the pawn here, and let's see if he tries to come forward this way. I'll check with my rook. But the main idea is after he moves his king, wherever it goes, I can actually drop my rook back. And where did he play? He played over here next. And then I just start checking along the back rank. And he can't escape the checks. Typical drawing idea in king and pawn endgames. So the game finally did end in a draw after all of that drama. But a very interesting back and forth game, and a solid performance by my 1600 rated player. I would say, the two weaknesses I noticed, one was that his a tendency to go for complicated tactical lines that didn't quite work when he had simple lines that were winning, and then maybe he wasn't as steady in the end game as he should have been, because he had some winning ideas there in the end game and he didn't find them. But they weren't they weren't such simple ideas to find. So not a bad performance from black. Anyway, that completes round two. At this point, I was feeling lucky to be at 1.5 points out of 2. And so stay tuned for my round 3 coverage, and I will see you then.